Hello there, I'm Rob Hudson. I'm an attorney with Frost Brown Todd, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our NKBA Legends series. Through its Legends series, the NKBA serves our legal profession by providing information to inspire and guide attorneys in developing ethical, responsible, and effective practice skills. In the Legends series, we present interviews of attorneys who've made their mark on the community and on the profession here in Northern Kentucky and Greater Cincinnati. Many of our finest lawyers are modest and they don't seek the limelight, but through this series, they step up to help the profession by sharing information about how they succeeded. During the program today, if you have questions of our interviewee, you can present them using the Q&A or public chat feature, and at the end of the program, we'll follow up on as many of those questions as time permits. Today, we're pleased and proud to have the opportunity to talk with NKBA legend, Kelly Holden. Kelly is one of the premier labor and employment lawyers in Greater Cincinnati. She's chair of the Employment Law Division at DBL. She's been with DBL Law for more than 25 years. Her practice focuses on advising business clients on hiring, firing, and everything in between. She's an experienced litigator, frequently practices before administrative agencies as well. She has a rich history of professional and community service. She's a past president of the Northern Kentucky Society for Human Resources, the leading human resource organization in Northern Kentucky. And for many years, she helped our profession by serving on the Cincinnati Bar Association's Grievance Committee. She currently serves on the board of directors for Cancer Free Kids, St. Charles Care Center, and Inter-Parish Ministries. She also serves on the Finance Commission for St. Veronica Parish, in the Human Resource Collaborative, and on the St. Elizabeth Cancer Patient Family Advisory Committee. Kelly is married with 4 fantastic children. Kelly, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to just start at the beginning, as we've done with these interviews, to talk about early influences that inspired you or led you down the path to become an attorney.
So I would say my earliest influences were actually books instead of people. I was a pretty quiet child. I read a lot and still read a lot. And those books sort of influenced me to steer toward the law. My favorite book of all time was To Kill a Mockingbird. It still is. It's the only book on purpose I have reread. And I felt it was a fascinating area. So I really started looking into it in high school. And I always enjoyed writing and research, and it just seemed to be a really natural fit for me.
So reading puts you on a path to eventually becoming a lawyer and seeking higher education. So that's a terrific element of the story, and something when our younger people view the video, they should pay close attention to, because it can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so the early influence was partly reading, but so many lawyers have different educational and work paths to become attorneys. What was your educational and work path?
So I actually attended Franklin College in Indiana, which probably a lot of people have not heard of. It's a really small private college, and absolutely loved it. I always say it's probably my favorite 4 years of my life. I really enjoyed that small environment where you got to know everybody, and I received a scholarship in journalism, which fit in with my love of writing. So I majored in journalism there, and then started taking a lot of business courses. I really got interested in marketing and just different paths that way, and knew that I really wanted to go to law school. But I thought, well, if that doesn't work out, I was interested in marketing, advertising, public relations, so worked at that. And then probably the last year and a half of being at Franklin, I became a contract writer for Indiana Bell. So they were downtown Indianapolis, and I worked on their employee newspaper. I wrote press releases, and the gentleman that I worked for was actually a lawyer. And he was probably my first real connection with a lawyer that I knew. I didn't know any growing up. I didn't live in a world of lawyers. I was the first person in my family to go to college. So I worked for him and found out that he had gone to IUPUI at night. He worked full time. And that really kind of led me on that path of I could actually go to law school. I was able, to work and go to school at night, which is what I ended up doing, going to Chase. So that job probably really catapulted me into that. My jobs prior to that were, my first job was a Frisch's car hop. That gives you an idea how old I am. I was a car hop and waited tables, which I actually really loved. And then right out of college, I worked for Cigna Insurance for almost 3 years and really enjoyed that job. And that job taught me how to read managed care contracts, work a little bit in the healthcare setting with, health insurance companies. And I started law school a couple of years out of college at night while I was still working at Cigna. So.
Yeah, your path then was not a 4-year, 3-year, 7-year, path. It sounds like closer to maybe 10 or 11, right? From beginning to end.
Yeah, it pretty much was, because I was 4 years of college. I waited a couple of years, and then it was 4 years at Chase nights, going pretty much year round, taking 2 classes in the summer. And I would say I didn't enjoy law school like maybe other people did, only because I was working full time and going to school at night. And law school's, it's hard, it's a lot of work, obviously, we all know that. So trying to manage that with a full-time work schedule was tired. I can literally remember sitting at traffic lights on my way to work and almost falling asleep. I was so tired from getting home at almost 10 o'clock the night before from class. But yeah, it was a little bit of an unusual path, but I really wanted to make sure it's what I wanted to do. So I waited those couple of years out of college before really diving in and going to law school. And I remember halfway through my very first semester, after I finally finished my finals, saying to my husband, I really want to go to a movie and feel like a normal person, because all I've done is work and go to school. And we went and saw A Few Good Men. And, that day, like that scene with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise is fantastic, great, and thinking, that's really what I want to do. Of course, I've not had that moment, but in my long career, but it's still a great movie. So.
Yeah, that you mentioned the fatigue. I think a lot of us remember the fatigue, and the only thing for me that's rivaled it is having young kids. that was also equally challenging. But,
yeah, right.
Yeah, I understand you started with DBL while you were still were you in law school at that point?
I was partway through my second year, and they had posted an ad, and Jim Dietz was in some of my classes with me. So Jim said, hey, if you're looking for a job, I was in the Career Center. I just started at this law firm if you're interested. So it was working directly for Jerry Benzinger and Mary Vorty, who was our nurse paralegal at the time. And I think the firm only had 16 lawyers. We were still pretty small. So I worked for Jerry, and I worked for Bob Hoffer, Kurt Phillips, Dave Kramer, doing our medical malpractice defense work. So I spent probably as much time at the medical library as I did at the law library, because I was, I hate saying this stuff, it makes me feel so old, but it was before we had the internet, before you could just get on and research anything. So if Mary needed a medical journal article, or she needed me to look at something, I would go over to the UC medical library. So I spent a lot of time hanging out there and doing that. But it was a great way to start my career, because I learned, Jerry told me when he hired me, he said, you pretty much are doing everything a new lawyer does other than going to court and talking to clients. So I was drafting answers and motions and got to sit in depositions, and it's a fascinating world. It's a difficult area of practice, but pretty fascinating. So yeah, so I started out doing that initially.
And they liked what you did because they hired you.
They did, yeah.
I
was thankful for.
Well, this next part's one of my favorite portions of the Legend series, because without exception, each of our legends had instrumental mentors. And often, they learn different things from different mentors that really shape them to become the leading attorneys that they are. And so this is your opportunity, Kelly, to tell us about your mentors and what they meant to you and what they taught you.
Yeah, so I feel really fortunate in that regard, and all the people at DBL who I previously mentioned were my mentors. I would say, the biggest mentors at DBL for me were certainly Jerry, initially working for him in MedMal. Bob's the one to blame for moving me over to labor and employment. Bob Hoffer said, hey, so I started here in 1993, right after FMLA got passed, ADA been passed. And he said, we are starting to see more and more questions from clients. None of them ever get sued on these issues, but I could use your help. And I think within a year, we had 2 or 3 lawsuits on employment. And then Mark Guilfoyle was, when I first started, was working for the governor's office, but he came back after his tenure with the governor's office and was doing some of our labor and employment. So I started working with Mark on cases. And they were all phenomenal mentors. Jack Lavelle was really great in helping me just with business dealings with the law firm. Some of his clients had employment work. And, not only were they phenomenal and are phenomenal lawyers, but really great role models of, how to serve the community and how to give back. And I just really learned so much from them. And honestly, I know without a doubt, I wouldn't be where I am without those people in my life. And, and I started with the Northern Kentucky Bar Association, attending a lot of the young lawyers events, the women's events. So then I got to make connections with other women. Betsy was really the only lawyer, Betsy Weber at DBL at the time, who was a female. And her and I worked in very different practice areas, and she was very busy having kids initially. So I didn't get to spend a lot of time with her initially, but later on certainly have. But I was really blessed to have not only the lawyers at DBL, but that whole Northern Kentucky bar, which was really instrumental in helping me, move forward and figure out what in the world I was doing. So it was great.
Well, in the intro, I explained a little bit about your practice focus of labor and employment law, but I wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive to talk about what you do day to day as a labor and employment lawyer.
Yeah. So is that, Rob, when you and I talked earlier, I said, there's probably a lot of lawyers who don't even know me or have never even heard of me, because I spend far more of my time with clients than I do with other lawyers. I mean, my job is really to keep people out of the courtroom, right? And prevent litigation. And I spend a lot of time doing that. So a lot of time counseling with my clients, how to hire, how to discipline, writing handbooks, writing policies, doing training. I'm very much of an introvert. I'm a learned extrovert because of this job, but I'm much more confident sitting in front of my computer and writing. But this job has really taught me to do certain things. And weirdly, and it always to this day is very surprising, one of my favorite things to do is to do training. I really love doing the training aspect and teaching people. And I just got to do one of my first in-person trainings, I think last week's, the first one in about 13, 14 months because of COVID. And it was so nice to be back with people and engage in a dialogue and have a discussion about, what we were talking about versus via Zoom. Zoom's great for some things, but training is so much better in person. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. When my clients do get an EEOC claim, Department of Labor claim, all the different admin agencies, I work on those. And then, they do get sued, unfortunately. Sometimes we just can't prevent that. So, I litigated all over the place, more federal court than state court. But my case is I probably have more in the Eastern District of Kentucky than anywhere else, but they always seem to be just sort of all over the place, depending on where the clients are, or there'll be other lawyers in my office and their clients get sued. And I'm, spending a lot of time in the road going to all these different courts. But I really love the consulting part of my practice. I really enjoy that. Litigation's hard because a lot of it's out of your control, right? It depends on how the judge rules, how the plaintiff's lawyer is going to be. But I do think it's really important for my practice. If I don't handle the litigation and see sort of what goes bad in a case, it makes me help my clients better on the front end of here's what you should do or not do to avoid that situation. And I spend a lot of time in mediation, trying to mediate and resolve the cases, which I always think is the best job. The best thing for our client is to quickly resolve these, if at all possible. So
well, and it's really hard to imagine or identify a practice area that's more diverse in terms of the required skill set and the opportunities to do drafting and litigating and arbitrating and mediating and writing policies and doing training, and that I've always thought that's one of the most fascinating parts of labor and employment law, is that you really do need to develop the ability to, at first you don't have all the skills unless you're just some savant, but over time it's a lot of fun to try to develop them. And I know that in talking with you, you have a great passion for the subject matter area, and so what's your perspective on the skill set as well?
Yeah, so I do think it's a really, really great area. I find it personally really fascinating, and I'm always pretty excited that I get to do this, and I don't have to do title exams or something, which for me, I wouldn't enjoy. I know there other people really love them, but it just doesn't fit my skill set. I find people really fascinating. So I was telling one of the younger lawyers yesterday that I've been hired in a lot of cases to be an investigator. So other lawyers, in our area will say, hey, I have a client who maybe has a really dicey sexual harassment, and we need to take that investigation externally and not have an internal person do it. So I've been hired to do that. And it's literally one of my favorite things to do, just because it's so fascinating that you can talk to people. They're all attended the same meeting, the same event, and their view of what happened at that is completely different. I just find that like crazy. And it's just the whole like human nature, of how people respond to things. So, I think a big part of the skill set is learning to listen, to listen well, to be a really good judge of character. I think you really have to have some business sense, because a lot of times when we're helping our clients make that decision, you have to worry about more than what the law is. How is this going to affect their business and their bottom line? A lot of, some of my companies I represent are very small. And these cases can be financially devastating to them. It can put them out of business. I've seen it happen. So really trying to figure out what's the best and quickest way to resolve this so they can go about doing what they want to do, which is their business, and not spending a ton of time with lawyers. So yeah, I do think it's a pretty varied skill set that you have to have with labor and employment. But it's so rewarding, it's just a really fun area. I have had some really fun cases over the years where just crazy stuff has happened, which I'm sure is true for any lawyer after, 25 years or so of practice, but I really enjoyed it.
Well, and you've developed then, I'm sure, your own style or approach to counseling clients, how to develop a bond with clients, and how to engender their loyalty. And without having you divulge all the tricks of your trade, are there certain features of how you do what you do that you think would be beneficial for a newer lawyer to hear about?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, there's a lot of different things. One of the hardest things probably in our profession is which I would say most lawyers are going to say this as well, but the immediacy of which people need a response. Because if somebody has a situation where someone is coming to the workplace, for instance, they're intoxicated, or there's a fight or some type of act of violence in the workplace, or they need to fire someone, they can't wait until you get back to them next week. They really need an answer immediately. So, being very responsive, I think, is important. And, it takes a while to sort of learn this area. You have to learn what the law is, then learn how to figure out how to counsel them properly. So, for me, like being responsive to them and being very thoughtful about how I advise them, and worrying more about the whole picture, what their business is, I think is really important in that regard and in our area of practice. And then when you're doing litigation, obviously, knowing how to write well, knowing how to research. I find our area pretty research intensive. I'm responding to a current inquiry, and I told one of the lawyers who's helping me, I'm like, you have to find the case law, like what is the support for our position? And it's a heavily litigated area, so it's nice to be able to find that support. And I think when it comes to keeping clients happy, so first off, I think a hard thing to learn as a new lawyer is not every client is the right fit for you. You're not the right fit for every client, and that's okay. And sometimes they're better off being served by other people. But when you can find that client that you really have a good relationship with, it is really nice. And I really always feel like I'm a partner to my clients. And I want to be, one of their advisors, and developing that good relationship, I think is really important, and just spending time with them, which I think is true in any practice area of the laws, finding the right clients and people you enjoy being with. And some of my
Uh,
clients are really some of my very good friends who I really do enjoy spending time with.
it's wonderful when you can have similar philosophies and approaches
Mhm.
with clients because it's so much easier to align
Mhm.
instead of having them be frustrated. And I mean, it's frustrating generally dealing with difficult employee issues, but
Right.
at least if we share the same philosophy, it helps, I think, quite a lot.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I think I'm pretty direct too. Like people will say, wow, you actually told me what to do. I'm like, well, you called for advice. And I remember having one person say that I don't really want to do that. And I said, well, then don't do it. I'm giving you my advice. But if you don't want to follow it, that's fine. And he said, I don't have to follow your advice. I'm like, you own the company. You can do whatever you want. But, and in that case, I write a memo that says, this is what I told him to do. So when it all goes bad, right?
yeah, just tell them to be sure to keep you as their lawyer so that you can handle the litigation arising from the decision.
Right.
Although that may not be many business owners would not appreciate that flippant comment. But
Right.
turning to one of my favorite subjects, and goodness knows when I started practicing, it was anything but, and I never thought of myself as being someone who would be responsible for developing a book of business. And there's so many different approaches to doing this. It's great to hear from the different legends as to how they did it. I mean, developing a book of business is not what they teach us in law school, but it ends up being as important as anything we do. And so what were some of the key steps in your development of a book of business?
Yeah, and Rob, I would agree with you. I felt like when I started out not knowing lawyers, not really being immersed in the legal field, that I was always 10 steps behind starting out. And it was a little panicky at first, how in the world is this going to happen? And it was very surprising me, like how organic and natural it was. And what I started looking at doing was looking for opportunities to really develop myself as a professional. And those weirdly led to client development opportunities. And I didn't go into it for that. So it was things like doing Leadership Northern Kentucky. I really enjoy those type of events, getting to meet other business leaders in the community, learning more about the community, working on how do I be a better professional and a better lawyer. So I tended to get involved in organizations that typically weren't targeted toward lawyers, were not attended by lawyers. So you mentioned Northern Kentucky SHRM, and I was on the board there from 2001, I think, to about 2015 or 16. And for me, initially, it was how do I be a better HR lawyer? While being around HR people, hearing what their issues are, developing a network was very crucial to that practice. But then a weird result was developing clients from that, or maintaining or strengthening the relationships with my current clients who belonged. So a lot of it was joining those professional type organizations, and then a lot of volunteer work. I had learned that in college about philanthropy and really enjoyed the volunteer work. So I continue that in, DBL. Like a lot of the law firms, we're very big on volunteering and giving back. It fits with my personal mission. And then volunteering, you just develop a network of individuals. And when they have a legal need or they own a company and they know you and think, oh, I have a need, I know Kelly, and then they call you for that. I feel like it happened without me really trying, weirdly, because I didn't go into those organizations for that, but that's basically sort of what happened. And and I've really enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
Well, and if you could talk a bit about the patient capital it takes to develop a book of business. For example, how many speeches have you presented through the years? How many in roughest terms, how many articles have you drafted for professional publications and otherwise? That it's not an overnight phenomenon for most people anyway.
No, certainly not. And I think the first 5 years that someone's practicing, you're just trying to figure out what you're going to do, right? With your legal career, you're trying to learn that particular area of the law. I attended so many CLEs those first couple of years, just trying to learn about family medical leave, ADA. So I spent that time just trying to develop a knowledge base. And then, having a journalism background, I started like our internal newsletter here. I'd done that in college and said, why we should do a newsletter for clients. And I started, and I would probably almost be embarrassed to pull it out now. It looks so rudimentary compared to, what the firm does now, which is very nice. But, I started absolutely doing that, like writing articles, writing newsletters. And in some sense, I feel like it's sort of a service to clients. So when there's a huge change in the law, you got to write an article, you got to get a blog post, you got to let people know, hey, this is happening, right? But then it also weirdly allows you to market your practice. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And presentations, I probably have done more presentations than most lawyers in the firm because my practice lends itself to that. Everyone wants to know about how to hire, how to fire, FMLA, COVID. I've done a ton of COVID presentations over the years. And so all these different organizations are happy to have a lawyer come and give free legal advice, right, for an hour. So I probably easily do 2 or 3 presentations a month. Have gotten very skilled at PowerPoint. So it's something I really, really enjoy. And if you would have asked me, growing up, do you want to go speak in front of a room of 300 people? I would have said, absolutely not, never, no way. And it doesn't even faze me now because I've just done it so much. So.
Well, one of the great things too is you learn from the attendees and their questions, and I think that say you've been asked to deliver a speech, and it's something that you're generally familiar with, but you need to do a deeper dive to get up in front of a group. Attorneys learn a lot from those presentations, and I know I always try to encourage newer lawyers to accept as many opportunities as possible because it's a fast track to becoming really proficient. Mm-hmm. Was that part of your development as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started watching like Mark Guilfoyle and Bob Hoffer do a lot of training and presentations. And a lot of time I was the person preparing those for them. So I was learning as I was preparing those presentations. And then I would go and watch them do the presenting and look at their presentation style. And then eventually they're like, well, why don't you co-present with me? So then I got to co-present. So it was sort of baby steps to get there, which was really nice. And now I do a fair amount. Occasionally we'll co-present on different items, but done a lot of that. I've done a lot where I've been on a panel of, just experts or different people to speak. And I would encourage any new lawyer, because even though I think my practice area lends itself to very naturally speaking to groups, I think there's a lot of practice areas, if you just find the right groups to speak with, that you can talk to. It's just that every company has employees, right? So because people say, well, what industry do you focus on? The companies that have employees. So, there is no particular industry, right? Like it's any industry versus if you're strictly a healthcare lawyer, your target is a little more limited to healthcare clients. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities for any lawyer in any practice area to speak. And, there's national organizations, state organizations to speak to, like Kentucky and Ohio have SHRM conferences. And I spoke at those the past few years. So you can just kind of, keep growing those speaking opportunities. So.
Well, and we talked a little bit about your service to the community, but, beyond just the positions held and such, if you could share with our newer lawyers what it's meant to you, how it's touched you, if at all, has it made you a better lawyer? What is your perspective on service?
So I think it's really paramount, that whole thing that to whom much is given, much is expected, right? So I'm a big believer in that. And I feel like I've been really fortunate and I've had some really great people help me along in my life. And I wouldn't be where I was at if people didn't help me. And you can't almost really repay those people. So paying it forward is a great way to do it. I worked for a gentleman when I was in college at Frisch's who just with some family dynamics going on, but he loaned me some money to finish my college. I knew this person for 3 months and and I eventually paid him back the money, but that measure of kindness, and just someone believing in me to take a chance and to do that, is crazy to me. So I have tried to repay that forward tenfold. To this day, he is still a friend of mine, and just a really great man who completely really changed my view on people. I believe there is good everywhere. So I have really tried to repay that. And sometimes I overextend myself. I think, when you volunteer, it's important to focus on organizations that you really have a passion for. So why do you want to volunteer at that organization? What's the passion? And I always tell people, ask a lot of questions. What's the expectation? Is there a monetary expectation to be a board member? What's the time expectation, committee expectation? Look at who their current board makeup is. Make sure they have DNO coverage, and that they're following the things that, they really should be doing by law. I just did some board training for our women's law group, just talking about being on a board, being aware of what the laws are in Ohio and Kentucky about board membership, what the expectation is. And I've really enjoyed the boards where it's something I have a passion for. So, now I've leaned a little more toward boards where cancer is sort of the issue. My first husband passed away young of cancer. So that obviously strikes a chord with me, and trying to find better ways to treat cancers, to cure cancers, more research, which is why I said yes to Cancer-Free Kids. Because helping them and helping doctors fund their cancer research, to me, is something that's very, very important to me, because of my personal experience. I did a lot of coaching of my daughter, more so when she was younger, but it was a great way to spend time with my kids, to give back and to coach her. And I love sports. I always loved playing sports. So, those were really fun years when I coached her in soccer and volleyball, and I probably didn't really entirely know what I was doing, but hey, I was the parent willing to step up and volunteer. So those are all things that I enjoy. And I hope that, as new lawyers come in, it's just a really great way to give back. It's a great way to meet other people in the community, to learn about this community. And boards love to have lawyers on their boards, right? They all, it's good to have a diverse board from a race, gender, and a professional perspective. So they all love boards, or they all love lawyers. So I've been fortunate to serve on a lot of them over the years and really enjoyed it.
And one of the great things too is the skill set that we develop as lawyers transfers fairly readily, and makes us, helps us to be good board members, and helps us to be, you kind of feel like I'm a fish in water here. I'm comfortable with this responsibility as a board member, because if it involves writing and analyzing and speaking, and working with people to try to understand their interests, then we're in an excellent position. I've always thought that it was interesting that the skills we develop as lawyers can help us do these collateral things that, again, a lot of people a lot of law students aren't keyed into that. Right. But it's a real blessing, I think. And it sounds like you've had a similar experience in that regard.
Yeah. I usually tell young lawyers, when you're, like, I just had one of the younger lawyers in the firm ask me about, well, when do I speak up and what should I say? And I said, I think, when you're a little younger and you're new to the board, spend more time listening than talking, learn from the people around you. And I certainly have every board I've been on. I learned from the finance people, which I don't necessarily have a background in, but I feel like, again, it becomes a natural evolution, as the older you are and the more work experience you obtain and the more boards you're on, it's really almost impossible not to at some point take a leadership role on that board, right? Because it's sort of what we have learned as lawyers, like how to be a natural leader, and how, we understand Robert's rules of order. We understand how to keep minutes and why that's important. And I remember Mark Guilfoyle saying this years ago when I was a really young lawyer, like, when you get on a board, you should really try to evolve into a leadership role. It's sort of an expectation of being a lawyer. You have the skill set for it, and you can make a really great leader, and you can really make a difference on that board. And it's something I've always, sort of strived for, based on his advice all those years ago.
Well, that's excellent. And let's move on to the part of our program that relates more directly to professional responsibility. And with this experience you had at the Cincinnati Bar Association on the grievance committee, I suppose you were immersed in these sorts of issues for many years. And what do you see as some of the key issues of professional responsibility that our fellow lawyers should be focusing on?
Yeah, so I was on that committee for 10 years, and it's a really great committee. I would encourage any lawyer to serve on, that or a similar committee. We all take professional responsibility in law school, and you have to take the test. I think you still have to take it. I don't even know. But, I remember taking the MPRE, and you learn those. But then as you start practicing, I think a lot of it is common sense for the most part. You shouldn't steal from your clients. You shouldn't drink alcohol and show up to work. I mean, some of those things we know inherently that you should not do in order to meet those rules. But there are some nuances to the rules and things that I think as the longer you practice, do you really remember that if you haven't read through the rules, for years? So sort of being immersed in that committee, going to a monthly meeting, always pulling out the rule book, looking at it. It was just a really great reminder of, oh yeah, we are supposed to do that. We are supposed to have a written fee agreement, for instance, and certain things that just don't seem as much common sense. So I really did enjoy that committee, and I got to meet a lot of lawyers that otherwise I never would have met because they're not in my practice area. They're in different offices, obviously. So I really got to see sort of this whole different aspect of the law that I would otherwise wouldn't have. I got to go in front of the Supreme Court of Ohio on multiple occasions and essentially be like a prosecutor, which is completely different from anything I have ever done. And, in some of the cases, quite frankly, were very sad. I mean, there were a couple of cases with younger lawyers that I felt bad for because I felt like they were taken advantage of by an older lawyer who wasn't as scrupulous, and they were young and they were desperate for a job, and they were sad, quite frankly. But then, it was like trying to help them out to become a better person, to become a better lawyer. But it was definitely a really different experience that it's hard to say I enjoyed it because, you're looking at some sad cases, and there were clients who were taken advantage of, or lawyers took money and didn't do work for them. But, it teaches you certainly that society has an expectation for lawyers, that you will always be ethical. You will do the work that you're being paid to do. It's important to answer your emails. It's important to answer the phone calls. That really makes people crazy when you don't do it. So I learned, it made me think I need to be better every single day when I would go to those meetings, right? Because you certainly didn't want to be the subject of one of those meetings.
Was the most common issue someone simply making a mistake or neglecting their duties, or was there some other consistent or more frequent offense or issue?
I would say that, when there were really serious issues, it unfortunately usually stemmed from some mental health issues. And then usually that came along with some drug and alcohol abuse issues. So then that person wasn't doing what they needed to do in their practice. They were ignoring clients, not doing the job they should do, missing court appearances, things of that nature. I mean, things that we all know as a lawyer, well, as a person, you can't do and be functional, right, in your position. So I would say that was the most crucial. But we certainly had complaints where it was just a difference of opinion between a client and a lawyer, and there was nothing that the client did wrong or nothing that the lawyer did wrong, and we would find that this isn't actionable. So there were a fair number of complaints we dismissed for that reason as well, which kind of goes back to sometimes if you just don't jive with the client, maybe they need to be served by a different lawyer. And I've had that situation. I always think that you should never compromise your integrity, right? Or your reputation, because cases will come and go, but your reputation will always stay with you, right? And it will precede you. Right. So, when I've had clients that I just don't think are ethical or telling me the truth, and it's not an easy decision, and it's only happened probably, less than 5 times in my career where I've said, you're probably best served by somebody else. I'm not really comfortable continuing on in the representation. And sometimes those have been my happiest days because those people have caused me a significant amount of stress in my practice. And I'm not willing to jeopardize everything I've worked for that person who I don't really feel is real ethical. So, but thankfully I've not crossed that bridge very often.
But what role does civility play with our issues of professional responsibility and effectiveness as lawyers from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's extremely important. I remember several years ago being on a panel with Mike Hawkins and Judge Grothaus and talking about, I think it was through the Northern Kentucky Bar, and talking about that issue. And if there's anything I've been dismayed about as a lawyer, it's sometimes the lack of civility. The super nasty letters that I've gotten from lawyers about, their client's position and personal attacks on me when I don't even know these people a lot. And I don't really understand that. So I have learned over the years, I don't respond to that. I keep it on a very professional level. I just respond back with, whatever the business is. Usually it's when you're trying to negotiate some type of severance or settlement and nasty. I don't get it as often. It seemed like when probably 10, 15 years ago, I'd see those letters more often. So I'm hopeful that the practice is becoming more civil. And I think, this is a really small legal community, right? Like Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky is pretty small. And for the most part, Rob, you and I see the same people over and over, right? So we've developed hopefully decent relationships with those other lawyers. And at the end of the day, that case will resolve with that client, and they're probably going to have another case. And I want to have a good working relationship with those lawyers because I think we all have the same goal, which is how do we resolve this for our clients? They're going to have their position. I'm going to have mine. There's no reason to be uncivil. So I don't really understand the lawyers who act that way. I remember trying a case in Northern Ohio. I was with David Burley, and David and I had a lawyer on the other side. He was not from this area, he was from Northern Ohio. And he would yell and scream at us in the courtroom so much his face would get red, do it right in front of the jury. And the judge, unfortunately, didn't have a lot of control of the courtroom. I can't imagine any of the judges around here putting up with what this particular judge put up with. And we ended up prevailing in that case. We won that case, and we did not have great facts going into trial. And I still think to this day that partly why we won that case is that the other lawyer lost the case because he wasn't civil. He wasn't kind to the witnesses. He wasn't respectful of the judge. He wasn't respectful of the process or us. And I think the jury really just hated him. And I don't think it served him good. So like him trying to be that TV lawyer yelling and screaming, I just don't really think worked out for him or his client. So, and that was, it was pretty early on in my career when I tried that case, and I've never really forgotten that lesson. Like juries do expect lawyers and judges to be professional. So I always certainly try to be that way, even when I'm not treated that way. I might, say bad things in my head when I leave the courtroom and I'm in my car, but I'm not going to do it in public.
Well, the bottom line is, the lack of civility, being angry and non-communicative or communicating in a subpar way, it's just not effective. It's just on balance, it's just not effective. And I come across it still from time to time. And that if an opposing counsel will engage me on the case and want to talk about the substance of it, right, we can talk, and I'm likely to divulge my position on certain issues, and we can understand each other better. Right. I'm like you, Kelly. I don't understand the alternate approach because sometimes it just makes you dig in.
It does, and I think it backfires too. I mean, I had a case in front of Judge Grothaus where I had a lawyer who over a weekend sent me and another lawyer at the firm 39 emails, and one was nastier than the other, and they were rather bizarre, honestly, just attacking us personally. I didn't even know this person. I'd never met him, attacking us personally, and they were very odd. And the other lawyer working on the case with me was pretty new to the firm, and I remember she called me at home like on a Sunday. Oh my gosh, she's like, what do we do? And I said, we do nothing. We do not respond to him. And then Tuesday, we filed a motion with the court, and I literally attached all 39 of his emails because I didn't even really need to say much, right? Like he dug his own hole. And that's the other thing I'm mindful of. Any letter or email or anything I send to another lawyer could show up as an exhibit in a court filing, right? So I want to be proud of what I've put in that letter, and I want it to be professional, and I want it to show that I'm at all times being civil, even if they're not civil back. So it's sort of a tactic I've used in litigation is when I have that very uncivil lawyer, I'm not going to hesitate to use that letter they sent me against them at some point. And you don't even have to say anything. The judges get it, right? Like they know. And usually when you have those individuals, the judges know who they are anyway. And I've certainly, I remember attending the practice seminar at the Southern District of Ohio, and the judge, one of the judges making that comment, like, we know who those lawyers are. So I thought, oh, well, I don't want to be one of those lawyers, right? Like I want to be someone that they view with respect, and I want to treat them with respect. So I hope that the practice is becoming more and more civil. It's a tough job. I think being a lawyer is a very difficult, demanding, very emotional job. I certainly feel like when someone trusts me with their business matters, and it's something they've worked hard for, it's a lot of pressure on us. So why would we make it even harder on ourselves by being so nasty to people who are part of our legal community? I just don't see the need for that.
Well, and as we're winding down here, a few, more personal questions, but I'm sure some of this is about balancing personal and work life. What are some of your greatest sources of satisfaction outside the practice of law?
Well, so obviously my kids, my kids are now, so my kids are 19 and 23, and my stepkids are 19 and 21. So we have a busy household. My kids have been fun at all different ages for all different reasons. They're also hard for all different ages, but it's really fun that they're growing into adulthood, and you can have more, we like the same kind of movies and books and sharing those kinds of things. We love to travel together. So, spending time with my family, my kids, my husband, my sister, my mom, my extended family, I spend a lot of my time doing that. If I'm doing something more personal for me, I love to ride bikes. I don't live far from the Loveland Bike Trail, so ride my bike any chance I can get. I used to run. That's gotten a little harder as I've gotten older, and my hips and knees hurt and things of that nature, which isn't so fun. But travel too. I really, really love to travel. It's not something I had done much as a kid. I read a lot of books about different places, so now I'm spending time going to those places, and really, really love to get out and travel. We're leaving next week to go to Belize for a week. It's a trip that's been planned for 3 years and didn't happen last year due to COVID. So I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm also excited about it too. And my kids are really excited about it. So, those are all things I've done, is just traveling and really spending time with family. It's always a lot of fun to do all those things for me.
Recharging the batteries, and it helps us to be better lawyers if we get some rest and find our extracurricular passions like that. And well, tell us, and this is not like a trick question or something, but I always think it's interesting to ask. Tell us something not widely known that people might find interesting about you.
Oh, I wish I was a more interesting person, but I would say the one thing that most people probably don't know about me is I was a disc jockey in college. It was a class I took as part of my journalism career. It was one of those electives, and was a disc jockey. And the woman who was a disc jockey with me actually went on and for her career became a disc jockey in Bloomington, Indiana. And we had a show called Kelly and Kim, and it was a lot of fun. She was much more of a natural talent at it than I was. Obviously, she made it her career, but that's something most people don't know about me. My daughter to this day always says, I don't think that's true. And I'm like, why would I lie about that? If I was going to lie about something, I would make it way more exciting than I was a college disc jockey.
Do you have any old audio of the show?
I do not. I'm sure they probably do, but I do not. I don't know if I want to listen to it, Rob. It might be embarrassing.
Well, Kelly, do you have final words of wisdom, wit, or advice for the next generation of lawyers in Northern Kentucky and Greater Cincinnati?
Um, you know, I think the one thing, the mantra I always try to live by is just treat everyone with respect. And even in times when maybe you don't think they deserve it, I am mindful that you never know what's going on in someone else's life, right? And everyone has their crosses they bear. And maybe if they're not so kind or nice to you, it has nothing to do with you. It's something else going on in their life. And maybe that's the day they need a little bit of kindness. So I'm always advocating for, a more kind and civil world because we don't get these days back, right? Like every day is precious. So make the best of each day, no matter how you can, and make someone else's day better. Like if you have an opportunity to do that. It's certainly, something I think with being a caregiver to my husband for a long time and then watching him pass away young, I've really tried to do all those things you said you weren't going to do, right? Like, and live now, not put living for the future, but doing bigger little things. So that's probably what I would have to say at the end.
Well, Kelly, this has been fantastic. As we wrap up today, on behalf of the Northern Kentucky Bar Association, we really want to thank you for your service to the profession and to the region. NKBA Executive Director Julie Jones will be sending out CLE information to our live attendees today. We always want your input at the NKBA. Contact us with your program recommendations and other suggestions. Thank you for joining us and have a terrific day.